Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Shirley Hoekstra. A famous historian has said that there is no major issue today that isn't also a religious issue. And so it is time to start educating our reporters so that they are experts on issues and context of religion. Our guest today is going to tell us about his experiences with journalists, religion, and the media. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Michael Cromartie of the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C., and he directs their Religion and Media program, which hosts seminars to promote serious reporting on religion and religious communities. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Great to be here.
You have a big job to do because often you read the newspaper or you listen to the commentators on TV. It seems like they talk past each other on the topics of religion and culture. They don't seem to get each other, understand each other. And you are trying to get people to understand each other. How do you go about that?
Well, through the generosity of the Pew Foundation, we actually were given a very generous gift to hold conferences for journalists. Because what we found was that many of the journalists who cover religious believers and religious actors in the public arena don't know any. And
they don't know about religious?
They don't know religious believers. They don't know any basic religious doctrines. The historian Martin Marty once said that the biggest news in the news today is religion news. In other words, religion it's just not at a religion page anymore, but everywhere you open up the paper, whether it's radical Islam or Catholic bishops' beliefs about stem cell research or the rise of the Christian right or how many progressive Christians voted for President Obama, it's all over the paper. And yet the people writing about it don't really know the subject. So an idea occurred to us about 10 years ago. Well, why don't we provide seminars to bring mostly secular journalists in to talk about religion and public life and to introduce them to what is a megachurch, how to understand Islam, bioethical questions that all religious believers ought to be concerned about. What is just war theory? I mean, we've gone the whole gamut of topics. In fact, we had one several years ago, what is Mormonism? When Mitt Romney was on the rise. Right. We had 2.5 hours with 24 journalists with a leading historian of Mormonism.
We get better reporting if people are educated, and we
Absolutely.
As a civil society, a democracy, really do rely on the Fourth Estate, the media,
Yes.
in order to give us accurate reporting. But the religion reporting is inaccurate because, as you said, they don't understand it.
Right, and what we tried to do, by the way, is invite political reporters, not necessarily religion reporters, political reporters who keep running into the religious questions all the time. And it's really impressive how eager they are to learn. I mean, they realize they've been educated in a largely secular environment. You know, the two-color map that we saw in the 2000 election and the 2004 election, a little less so in the 2008 election, of the red and blue states. The blue states are populated largely by secular elites. And the red states are populated by people who attend church at least once a week.
So the secular elites are those people who are in the media, who are in movie producing perhaps,
Yes.
and then sometimes in higher education, the sort of leaders of that academic elite, and they don't understand.
Not sometimes in higher education, largely in higher education.
And we're hoping that in Christian higher education we have a little bit
Influence, yes.
of an influence there.
Absolutely, and you know, the great sociologist Peter Berger once said that the most religious country in all the world is India, the most secular country in all the world is Sweden, and America is a country of Indians ruled by Swedes. And I think largely in the media, it's a Swedish media, if you will.
Right.
It's people who've gone to all the leading universities. They're very smart, very talented. But when it comes back to the basic understanding of religious core doctrines, there's a total dearth of knowledge.
So how did this manifest itself in the recent political elections, where there were obviously issues of religion or faith, you know, like with Governor Palin, with McCain, with Obama, all of those things came up. Where did the media get their information on how to deal with these?
Well, as you know, one thing that's interesting about that story is the Democratic Party, unlike 2000 and 2004, put forward a candidate that actually could speak in religious language. Now, the Reverend Wright episode sort of took him off track a little bit.
Right.
But the Democratic Party hired the Obama campaign and Hillary Clinton's campaign hired a religious advisor to the campaign because they said, you know, the Republicans are winning all the religious people, and so we need help. So the press covered that, and they thought that was a real story, and they were right to do so. However, there's just a lot of areas where they don't have any knowledge. I mean, for instance, during the campaign, I had a call from two major religion reporters the morning that it was revealed that Bristol Palin was pregnant. And both reporters said, the McCain campaign has ended. It's over, isn't it? This
Why?
is so
Because
embarrassing, they said.
Oh.
And I said, well, actually, no. There'll be a lot of sympathy now from religious conservatives because in our mega churches, a lot of teenage pregnancy happens. And so I said, you are confusing 1940s fundamentalism with 1980s and 1990s evangelicalism.
So the media people have caricatures and stereotypes of religious people. They're sexually repressed, they're judgmental.
They're legalistic,
right.
They're pharisaical.
Right, they don't have any grace.
No grace at all, and therefore look at this, and here's Governor Palin trying to be this conservative Christian, and her daughter got pregnant. Where I had to say, actually, let me explain to you some concepts. Forgiveness, grace, mercy, and renewing and restoring your life is a big part of the conversation that goes on in millions of churches and thousands of churches with millions of people all the time.
This made her both human, Sarah Palin,
it did.
And they were going to actually see if her religion had any depth and meant anything. So how was she going to deal with her daughter? Was she going to be loving with her daughter? Was she going to be supportive with her daughter? And the rest of the people who came around, they didn't want to have a picture of judgment. They wanted to
Don't you remember when the convention occurred, and there was, now a lot of things have occurred since then, but the daughter arrived with her then potential future husband, Levy, and the McCains were out on the tarmac and greeted them. And there was this embrace. And, I mean, I have to say, as a believer, I got chills thinking. I mean, they were bringing this young man in and saying, we know you've made a mistake and you're a part of our team. And I think, you know, again, as we said earlier, there's this sort of a caricature that this, well, we'll just take her off the campaign. We'll just drop her. And I said to both of these reporters, you know, you really need to understand that forgiveness and grace is really a key component of why megachurches are growing so fast.
Do you think that the media who come to your conference are actually getting it by having these two-day conferences? Are they fast studies?
Absolutely. Oh, they're very fast studies. And we've had to track the articles that have flown out from the meetings. And just to keep our funders happy, we want them to know that we're not just having these meetings in Florida, but actually we really are able to see how their reporting is affected and more nuanced and more carefully thought through and their perceptions. And we had 2.5 hours with Rick Warren, and that was the most lively interchange that I've ever moderated.
So Rick Warren's a megachurch pastor, has a ton of influence in the country, actually was the invocation speaker at President Obama's inauguration, but that caused a fury in some parts of the country. How did the media get it right and get it wrong about inviting Rick Warren?
Well, by that time, I think actually some of the critics of President Obama made fools of themselves because the media had known that, in fact, Rick Warren gives away 9/10 of his income, spends a lot of time in Africa caring for AIDS victims and also encouraging churches to care for AIDS victims. So the record was there. And many people in the media knew this. And so the attempt to caricature Rick Warren as some sort of far-right religious fanatic who was harsh and unkind wasn't going to work. And so I think people who were liberal sympathizers to President Obama wanted to say to the people to the left, you can't talk about Rick Warren that way. This is not Jerry Falwell.
Right. He's a much broader character
much
than
broader
that.
character with a record now of generosity that can't be second guessed.
Now, most media people like to see themselves as people who are unbiased and just sort of report the facts or the truth. But have you seen them exercising a bias against religion and religious communities?
Oh yeah, there are examples of bias. But what I really found is more than bias is a lack of information. They really don't know information. They don't know these fundamental concepts that you and I take for granted. And so that when a senator recently got in trouble in Louisiana for some extra marital activity, a Newsweek reporter called me and said, is he going to recover? I said, well, let's see. He's apologized to his wife, he's apologized to his constituency, he's repented publicly, and he's going to try to make his life new again. I think he'll probably make it. And she said, why? And I said, because these people believe in grace and forgiveness. Right. And she said, no wonder evangelical churches are growing so fast. What a great message. And I said to her, and it's in Newsweek, I said to her, it's because that's why the gospel is called good news.
Right.
It's not bad news, it's good news.
That's right. There's a second start.
And she was stunned by this concept. It was not new, it was new to her. But I do know a new level of respect and generosity toward religious believers has grown. That they realize that there's a whole world of people out there that have been foreign to them, and that these are basically decent people, right, who are concerned about the moral state of the culture. So you get less caricaturing.
So those of us who are believers have grown up with sort of a literacy around the Bible and around religious concepts. Now that comes partly from church attendance. It might come from the schooling that you've received. But you'll remember when prayer was taken out of the school by the Supreme Court decision, and we have had now a whole generation and more who have not had prayer in school, and what I think is sort of a baby out with the bathwater experience, which is then no biblical literacy as well. Well, if you couldn't pray, then you couldn't study the Bible, and you couldn't become familiar with the Bible because it was somehow promoting religion, establishing religion. Do you think that the journalists that you see today are a product of that, or is it the general secularization of their home life or their university experience? Why are they so illiterate about a basic, fundamental, important concept to life?
Well, I think it's all those things that you mentioned. I think it's a really misappropriation of the meaning of separation of church and state, which means to some people a separation of any discussion of religion in public settings.
That's right.
Which is really anti-humanities and anti-liberal arts education. But it's also the secularization of their home lives. And you just get examples where you can be talking to reporters about the most basic things. Like when the Southern Baptists, I had this humorous occasion where the Southern Baptists were debating male-female relationships in marriage.
That's right. And
the whole headship controversy. And I had a New York Times reporter call me and say, why are they talking about this? Why is this a big deal? I said, well, in Ephesians 5, there's this passage. And as I got to explain it, she said, Ephesians, what is that book? Who's the author?
Oh, but you thought it was...
And who's the publisher? I said, I had to start over. I said, well, there's a book called the New Testament, and there's these letters by a man named the Apostle Paul. He's the author. But I realized I had to back up and start over and not take the references to the New Testament you and I take for granted. This was a person who didn't know what the New Testament was, didn't know who the Apostle Paul was or what Ephesians was.
But see, now this is the bias when we were chatting about this just a minute ago. When you are an editor and you're sending out reporters and you're saying, okay, is this person qualified? You would never send out a reporter to speak with the financial heads of corporations without that person having basics of economics. But we send reporters who don't know what Ephesians is, who don't understand the 2 books of the Bible. Why? Is it because they think it's unimportant? Do they think, why are they so ill-prepared, and why do their editors send them out so ill-prepared?
No, you're right. It's interesting. We wouldn't send somebody out to cover the Middle East who had no working knowledge of the Middle East. And in so many examples we give, we would say that we'll send this reporter because she or he has been trained in that area.
Right.
But the Washington Post got some criticism years ago when they said a religion reporter was named, and she says, I'm here simply because I'm curious. But I have not studied in seminary or have any graduate work in religious studies. I'm just a smart reporter, and I'm curious about these people.
Okay.
And they said, well, you're talented, we'll put you on the case. Now, she was a quick study, and she did a good job. But you would want to ask the question, if you're going to cover religion, do you even have a 1-year graduate degree in religious studies? Right. Do you know about the different branches of Islam and the different interpretations of the Quran? You know what the difference between a Southern Baptist and a Roman Catholic is?
Right.
And they didn't do that. And so there were some articles written about the fact that you wouldn't do this in any other area. But in general, as I say, even the editors above the writers are people with this Swedish mentality. It's thoroughly secular, and they think that religion is a curiosity, that religious people are kind of curious. And when they find out that someone like Rick Warren has sold a book that has sold 25 million copies, they go, oh, we ought to probably cover this.
That it has a sort of objective marker
It gets
of
their
importance.
attention. It
That's
really
right.
gets their attention.
So when you see all the conflicts all over the world, like you said, Marty said, there is no issue that really isn't a religious issue. All the wars, all the poverty, all these things. Is the secular elite sort of saying, hey, maybe we better have a better grounding about the principles for which these people are fighting?
Oh, no, I give them credit for that.
Yes.
The New York Times, instead of just having a religion page, hired a religion writer. And the Washington Post did this. In fact, the Times has several. And the Washington Post now has several. And their job is to they're not in the back in some religion section. On the front page of both of those papers, you get stories by reporters whose full-time beat is to cover the relationship between religion and politics. So the editors have finally got it. I think it was even pre-9/11, although after 9/11 they said, oh my, we really need to cover radical movements that have a religious commitment. But pre-9/11, the rise of the Christian right was a curiosity that came out of nowhere to many liberal elites. And so they said, we need to cover these people. And, but I mean, even back during the Civil Rights Movement, you had reporters that didn't want to call Martin Luther King Reverend Martin Luther King. And they thought the black church is a curiosity, but they were more interested in the social movement of civil rights and its leaders. But as you and I both know, the religious civil rights movement was led by clergy. And so again and again, you see these examples where they're not only tone deaf to religion, even some of them are like nervous about religious people. And now, I think the success of our program has been that we've actually got good reporters who know that they lack the knowledge, they lack the information, they want the information. They know it will make them a better reporter.
That's right.
And so I think they like the program because they know we're not trying to push an agenda, either political or religious, but in fact we're trying to help them do their job better by understanding these issues.
And so what that will also help in is this problem where they can't tell what is crazy religious behavior from what is just sort of orthodox or thoughtful, deep Christian or other kind of faith behavior. When David Koresh happened, way back when there was in Waco, Texas, with all of that inferno that ultimately happened, how do you report on why would people join such a group? Or when we had the Mormon in was it Texas?
Yes, that incident happened in Texas.
Right, where they had the marriage to young females. And people say, now, how does that happen in religion? And the problem there is that you think, well, all religious people have these sort of crazy behavior patterns, and so you can't trust them. And it breaks down that.
What I'm encouraged about is that the better reporters have found out that there's distinctions that have to be made.
Okay.
And that they on their Rolodex now, if you will, or on their computer, they've got the names of experts to people to call who know that not all evangelicals are alike or monolithic, not all fundamentalists are the same, not all Mormons are the same, Islam is diverse. And so they're on the phone and they're saying, now help me understand this, and will this candidate be able to appeal to that group? And they're doing their homework. And the ones that are good really work at it. Then you get some sloppy people who will call up and say, I know who these people are and I'm going to write this.
Right.
And it's unfortunate.
So sometimes there's a complaint that they have a preconceived notion of what they're going to write. It doesn't really matter what you say, doesn't matter what you explain. This is the view that they have of Christians, and so they're going to write it.
But the best reporters will come to me and say, I want to go to lunch. I'm going to go cover John Ashcroft when he was the head of the Department of Justice. And I'm not going to do a story on John Ashcroft. I'm going to do a story on his minister father, his minister grandfather, his minister great-grandfather. I want to do a story on the Assemblies of God.
Okay.
And I said to her, Nina Easton, I said, now the Washington editor of Fortune magazine and formerly the Washington Post, I said, Nina, I got a book for you here by Grant Wacker. It's the best book on the Assemblies of God in America. You'll want to read the following chapters. Here's a few articles, Understanding Charismatic Christianity. But if you're going to be there for 2 weeks and you've told me you're going to attend some Assemblies of God churches, I can't prepare you enough for what you're about to witness.
Right.
She said, well, I'm sort of a lapsed Catholic. I can handle it. Well, she came back and called me and said, you didn't prepare me enough for what I witnessed in those worship services. But she wrote a balanced piece on trying to understand the man's lineage religiously. Now that's the kind of person that does their homework.
Do you think that some of the reporters resent the power that religious groups have or have exercised in the past? Do you think they think it's an abuse of power, or they are just afraid of it?
I think they're afraid of it, and there have been accusations in the past of these people are all theocratic and they want to impose a theocracy on America. The fact of the matter is their power is not that strong, and their power has always been overinflated. I mean, they have some power. They're a player among all the players, but they're not running the Republican Party, and they're not running the Democratic Party, but they're having some say in all these deeply important ethical issues that our public life continually brings forward.
When we see this bias about wanting to write the article before they've even really interviewed, don't we sometimes find even with Christian groups there's a lack of understanding or respect between each other as well? Have you seen that there's maybe a bias about conservative Baptist individuals or charismatic individuals or Pentecostal individuals, Reformed individuals? What do they stand for? What do they mean? And we think we know it.
It happens a lot, and it's unfortunate because when these groups finally get together and they understand each other, they realize, well, I always thought you were this, that, or the other, and oftentimes it just needs to be humanized in getting these people in conversation.
Well, we've seen sort of faith as it was lived out with the Bush administration. There was some very serious, determined faith initiatives that came out of his administration. And now President Obama is actually taking faith initiatives and putting his slant on them.
Yes.
So how do you help people understand why you can have a person with President Obama's particular platform wanting to be a man of faith and a person with President Bush's faith perspective and wanting his platform? How do you get people to understand that?
Well, what I'd first like to tell them to understand is that remember when President Bush did this, how deeply critical and how scrupulous you were in going after him on
right.
this.
Right.
And how little we've heard about what President Obama might be doing. I mean, their plans are similar. And so it's just interesting to see that I don't think President Obama has been scrutinized on this question quite like, remember when President Bush came out, everybody was writing that this is a theocratic attempt to take over the country. And I'll just be curious to see how long it takes for the press to say, President Obama, are you really messing with the separation of church and state by doing this?
Well, do you think, though, it could be two reasons. On the one hand, it could be that we're so used to now faith initiatives coming out of the White House that it's not a story as much. Or it could be that people don't want to criticize a very popular president on faith initiatives because it makes him look too much like Bush, or they can't really understand why you could have so many different viewpoints and yet be so concerned about serious faith issues. What do you think?
Or it could be that, as John McCain used to say about the press until he ran for president, this is my base. And I think it could be that in all the empirical data shows us that the press is very sympathetic to President Obama. Right. And until he does something really crazy or outrageous, they're going to give him some slack, even on the faith-based initiative.
So what's making your job easier right now?
Well, what's making it easier is the fact that the whole idea that religion was going to go away in the modern world, that secularization was going to lead through modernity to non-belief, is actually not the case at all. And so that no matter who's president, liberal or conservative, religious questions keep coming to the fore. Why do they do so? Because there are a lot of really religious people out there.
Well, and they're important questions. The reason why
they're
they come
huge
up,
questions.
They're huge questions, and they go to the very basis of our humanity.
Of our humanity. And so, for my work, there's never going to be a lack of questions to raise. Religion and Christianity is exploding in Africa, exploding in Latin America, exploding in Southeast Asia. And you can't be a foreign policy reporter and not know what is happening in these countries. And in America, even despite the fact that we've seen a rise of people who call themselves non-believers, what's still there is that there's these millions of people who are. And those are people who are taking their civic life seriously, and they have questions about some research done in bioethical questions, in the life issues, and they want to know, are our leaders taking those questions seriously? So the idea that religious believers are going to go away is just not true. They're always going to be here, and it's going to be a family conversation between conservatives, liberals, progressives about how our life ought to be ordered together, and religious believers are going to have something to say about that.
Well, one of the things that happens when a person or a country or the globe is tired of war is that we say, are there other ways of arriving at solutions? And we know that one of the ways of arriving at solutions is understanding each other well. I think that's what President Obama has been saying. He says, look, I'm going to reach out, I'm going to go talk to people, I'm going to send my Secretary of State, we're going to engage in this kind of diplomacy. Well, you can't do that without understanding what matters to people.
Right.
And what we know is that faith, religion, God, matters to people in a variety of settings and contexts. So what's the top advice? You're speaking now to Hillary Clinton. Okay, she's called you. She says, Michael, I'm going to be doing that. What's the top 10 things? Let's say 3. What are the top 3 things you're going to advise me on? What should I do?
You know, I've never been asked that question before, but I mean, I really would say, if I was Chief of Staff for Hillary Clinton,
right.
We need in this office an expert on Middle East religion, right. And what the differences are between Israeli Jews and Palestinian Christians, and what the differences are between Shia and the Sunnis in Saudi Arabia and Iran, and what it means for the future of Iraq and Afghanistan. Right. In other words, we need a person in here who says, you can't promote that because you will inflame the following.
Right.
And my advice would be, you need a religion expert on your staff. And if you say, well, one person can't do all that, then say, well, hire 3 of them.
Right.
Hire one who does the Middle East, hire one who understands Africa and the explosion of Christianity in Africa. 1 out of every 2 Africans today is a Christian believer. That's a lot of people.
That's a lot.
So, I mean, we mustn't just say, I want to know if you have a PhD in foreign policy or international relations from Georgetown. I want to know, do you know religion in foreign policy?
Right.
And do you want to know religious believers? Because so many of our policies will have an effect right now.
Right, and you're not aware that they have sort of an office of understanding faith and religion.
No, I'm not aware of that, and if somehow through this program it happens, then you and I can take credit.
All right. My guest today has been Michael Cromartie of the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C., and I'm Shirley Hoekstra, and thank you for watching Inner Compass.